Right, ladies and gentlemen, I must say that I've researched the hell out of this, and I mean really spent a lot of time researching this video, to the point where actually releasing this video is late, because well, there's a lot to it, and I really want to show you exactly what's going on in the world. Now, if you've been watching Morning Shot, if you watch Morning Shot in 2025, there's a lot of stories that are covered, from Israel to Somaliland to Iran to Nigeria, and so forth, and all of these stories are important because they show a degree of a coherent narrative. But before we get onto the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and share this video with friends to help the video go viral. Now, there's a lot going on, from Venezuela to Somaliland to Israel and Palestine to Australia and the UK. What we're seeing is narratives out of all the different states. And what we're seeing is a lot of those narratives are coming out on ideological grounds. Now, I've tried to show you in certain videos what's going on in Australia and in the UK. And really, it's important to understand how the left, to a large degree, has aligned itself with Islam in order to capture many states. Now, you know who you should really listen to about how this whole capture has occurred? An Iranian who's had their country go from Persia to Iran through forms of capture, specifically capture with the left. In fact, have a watch yourself.
I'm a political refugee from Iran. I've been to prison, I've been under Islamic law, and I know how it starts and I know how it ends. And it always starts with the, for some reason, unity of left and Islamists. And it scares me. So I came here to be free. I chose Canada as my second home to be live in a free country. And I'm beginning to get really scared, because the way things are going, it looks like they're going to basically appease Islamists just to not raise any ruckus or something. They're just going to appease them step by step, and they're not going to stop. They see it as a sign of weakness, so they're going to take more and more, and I'm against that. I believe Canada should be free, and freedom of speech is something that nobody can take.
Now, where we are seeing this the most is actually in Venezuela. Now, for those of you who don't know, Venezuela is basically a communist or socialist shithole. It's where you get the whole Chavo Guerrero type meme, because that's where he started, effectively. Now, as you'll know, if you watched my video from yesterday, well, the United States conducted a military operation. I love this new framing for warfare, military operation, which the Russians started. Anyway, they conducted a military operation inside Venezuela. And during that, they first bombed the country and then captured the president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife. Now, they flew them to New York to face charges. Now, don't forget, New York is where Mamdani is, and we'll get to that in a minute. Now, many critics are framing this as an act of war, a violation of international law, and as a precedent for unilateral regime change. Unilateral regime basically meaning it's been done by one country, specifically the United States, and it was done with the purposes of causing regime change. Now, let's use a typical example of here in South Africa. What has been the response? Well, in the usual fashion, the EFF. Yes, I know there's loads of you going, well, who the hell are they? I don't know, fourth largest political party. But they're also socialist and heavily far left. Now, they've called the entire thing an imperial act of aggression, and they reject any claim of humanitarian or surgical intervention, because that's what Trump says. He says that he's done it because the country is about to collapse. And they cite explosions, panic, and civilian fear as being the hallmark of what Trump has done. So the EFF argues that foreign military intervention never brings democracy, and you have to ask yourself a question as to why the EFF is supporting a dictator. He's a dictator. He didn't win the elections. He stole the elections. He actually lost them and still stayed in power. But the EFF want to talk about democracy? Who knows? Anyway, they suggest that the entire event done by the US will bring chaos, suffering, and instability. And they have forms of historical parallels, which they suggest you can see where they've got involved and has caused just that. They cite Panama, Congo, Iraq, and Libya. Didn't even know they know where Panama was. In any case, they said that Venezuela is being punished for resisting Western control over oil and sovereignty. And they say that South Africa has a moral duty to oppose it. Now bear that in mind. Remember, these guys have a moral duty to oppose regime change in Venezuela. Now, many individuals are speculating why this all occurred. Why did Trump do this? It must be because of the oil, right? Well, actually, that's not true. And actually, Marco Rubio himself has explained it in a very logical way.
States need to take over the Venezuelan oil industry.
Well, we don't need to. First of all, let me go back up. We don't need Venezuela's oil. We have plenty of oil in the United States. What we're not going to allow is for the oil industry in Venezuela to be controlled by adversaries of the United States. You have to understand, why does China need their oil? Why does Russia need their oil? Why does Iran need their oil? They're not even in this continent. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
Have specific oil companies?
We also want to see that oil and the proceeds from it. Hold on. We want to see the oil proceeds of that country benefit the people of Venezuela. Why have 8 million people left Venezuela? 8 million, the single largest mass migration probably in modern history, left Venezuela since 2014 because all the wealth of that country was stolen to the benefit of Maduro and his cronies in the regime, but not to the benefit of people of Venezuela. You know how destabilizing 8 million migrants is? The number one fear that Brazil has, that Colombia has, that all these countries in the region have about what's happening in Venezuela and our involvement is they're afraid of another mass migration event. That's what they fear. This is deeply destabilizing stuff. It's not going to continue to happen. They are not going to come from outside of our hemisphere, destabilize our region in our own backyard, and us have to pay the price for it. Not under President Trump.
Let's talk big picture.
What he said is basically this isn't actually around oil, it's around China and Russia. Because China and Russia are trying to get into Venezuela. In fact, the rumors are that China was in Venezuela on the day that the event occurred. Now, according to Marco Rubio, the US just doesn't want to see China and Russia in its backyard on the Americas. And obviously, it's South America, not North America, but still, it's too close for home. Venezuela is actually in striking distance of the United States. Proximity-wise, they're very close. And so according to them, they just don't want to have to deal with an aggressor of Venezuela. And the current Venezuelan government isn't working with the United States. In fact, the current leader of Venezuela is a supporter of, are you waiting for it? Palestine. Yes, he is a supporter of Palestine. And there are videos circulating of him putting on forms of Palestinian garb in celebration and solidarity with Palestine. In fact, have a watch.
¡Que viva nuestra patria Venezuela! ¡Que viva Palestina! ¡Que viva el Líbano! ¡Que viva la patria grande! ¡Hasta la victoria siempre! ¡Que viva la patria! Gracias, muchas gracias. ¡Venceremos!
التلفزيون العربي.
Now, I did say in my video yesterday that once Venezuela falls, that the next logical conclusion is, well, Cuba. And would you know it, Marco Rubio basically just confirmed exactly what my suspicion was. In fact, have a watch.
When it's Donald Trump, all these Democrats go bonkers.
Is the Cuban government the Trump administration's next target, Mr. Secretary? Very quickly.
Well, the Cuban government is a huge problem. Yeah, the Cuban government is a huge problem. First of all,
so is that a yes?
Cuba, but I don't think people fully appreciate. I think they're in a lot of trouble, yes. I'm not going to talk to you about what our future steps are going to be and our policies are going to be right now in this regard, but I don't think it's any mystery that we are not big fans of the Cuban regime, who, by the way, are the ones that were propping up Maduro. His entire, internal security force, his internal security apparatus is entirely controlled by Cubans. One of the untold stories here is how, in essence, you talk about colonization, because I think you said Delcy Rodriguez mentioned that. The ones who have sort of colonized, at least inside the regime, are Cubans. It was Cubans that guarded Maduro. He was not guarded by Venezuelan bodyguards. He had Cuban bodyguards. In terms of their internal intelligence, who spies on who inside to make sure there are no traitors, those are all Cubans.
All right.
But you see, there's a problem here. You see, the problem is that many individuals are gathering in Venezuela by their thousands to celebrate the arrest of Nicolas Maduro because he is a horrible, horrible person. Have a watch. But in typical fashion, the left, the insane communist left in New York, because unfortunately New York has now been captured by communists, hence the election of the communist, well, Mamdani. Now, those individuals in the US, usually white liberal women, I must stress they're usually the same kind of individuals, are suggesting that, oh, terribly sorry, we don't want this to occur. But the problem is that actual individuals in Venezuela are saying, please don't apologize for this. We want it to occur. And the fact that you don't want us to be liberated from tyranny shows that actually you have a mental illness. Now, for those of you who don't know, Nicolas Maduro is a terrible person. Under his watch, there has been over 1,200 political prisoners, hundreds of documented victims of torture, over 7.9 million Venezuelans exiled, which is why you are seeing all over the world, numerous individuals are saying they don't want to see this. And you're seeing solidarity with the Venezuelans in countries as far as Spain. And that is because the Venezuelan diaspora is huge, all caused by this communist dictator. Now, this is leading many to ask the question why in New York City, in a country far removed from the conflict itself, we are seeing marches going hands off Venezuela. Now, one of the things that you will notice, if you look hard enough in the actual audience, you will see pictures or placards of, would you guess it? Yeah, Soviet stuff. Yep, we're actually seeing the communist logos being flown with these so-called communists of the West. What you also are seeing are numerous amounts of, well, Palestinian garb, with people wearing the Palestinian scarves. Now, don't forget that's not actually a Palestinian scarf, it's a scarf they stole from the Iraqis. Anyway, that's another story from another time. But the reality is, many individuals are now suggesting that life is better for them now than it was with the dictator. And many of them are saying, what is wrong with you in the West that you have such an aversion to us getting our freedom? You aren't the ones that have to live with the dictators. Now, where we can see this the most is actually in a speech given by a journalist in Venezuela. And you can watch that here.
Now a message to my English-speaking friends, because I'm already seeing people are organizing protests, hands off Venezuela, let's defend Maduro, we love dictators. Do not for a moment let your hatred and disdain for Donald Trump, an unsavory character, have you defending the dictator of my country that was destroyed by him and Chavez and their system 20 years ago. We Venezuelans are very, very happy that our dictator has been arrested, removed, and will be put through a trial. It's the first time we're seeing justice in 26 years. Now let's hope that they get the rest of the criminals out of Venezuela, and then we can return home.
Now, if you look online, you're going to see videos such as this one, which I'm about to show you, of numerous people lining all over Venezuela celebrating. What you can also see is that the actual Venezuelans in the diaspora, the people that have had to flee Venezuela, are now going out and storming the protests, the communist protests that say, hands off Venezuela. And they are saying, please bug off. We want this to occur. You white Democrats are clueless. Actual Venezuelans are ecstatic because the individual was horrendous. In fact, have a watch. But you see, what we can see as a consequence of this is that countries such as Qatar are saying that they are expressing deep concern because many of these countries thought that they had an ally in Venezuela because, again, Islamist countries have aligned with the left. Venezuela itself was a leftist country, and Qatar obviously is an Islamist country, and they think that they seem to have solidarity between the two. Now, you must remind yourself that Qatar actually loves Hamas. And do you know who else loves Hamas? Yeah, the ANC. Now, before we move on, let's actually talk about Hamas, the organization which the ANC loves to praise. Why? Because, I don't know, Palestine or something. Now, for those of you who don't know, Hamas has just updated its manifesto. Yes, they've updated their manifesto in December 2025. Now, that in itself is important to understand because in this new manifesto, a 42-page long manifesto, which has not received any global recognition whatsoever, we are seeing numerous things that are really interesting. And you have to ask yourself, is this what the ANC supports? But before we talk about what the new charter actually says, I'm going to show you a clip from the 1980s with Hamas, when they originally founded themselves, what they actually said their goal was. Have a watch.
When we talk about setting agendas, we have the agenda of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What we are talking about, a blueprint or a plan of action, if you will, to achieve that goal where this society, which began as mainly a Christian society, now is called Judeo-Christian society. Our immediate goal should be to change the society in Islamic society. Overall, our goal should be to integrate Islamic values and principles in the decision-making and policy-making levels of this government, whether it be at the state level, county level, and national level.
When we start talking about establishing a political agenda, I think we are in total agreement that we as Muslims have an agenda, Allah's agenda. We need as Muslims to be involved with people, whether it is on the city level, the local level, the state level, the national level or the international level. We as Muslims must be involved in people. See, there's three ways that we can change the world. One is by revolution, which has its own source of problems. And one would be to work within a system and make the changes from within. And the other is what I like to call attraction and reversion. When you're involved in the political system on your local level to change the school systems, we have the power to change the system that we live in.
American melting pot. We do not want to melt into American society and disappear. We want to go into American society with Islamic ideals and revamp their thinking. We want to revamp them. We want to turn them into Muslim individuals. We shouldn't have feelings of distaste for them or intolerance because they're potential Muslim. Education is one of the most important areas that Muslims have to address. And while our objective, our final objective, is not just to become part of the system that we experience now and that we see, our objective, our final objective, is to create our own Islamic systems, and not only create Islamic systems for Muslims, but to look at all the other people who are sharing this country with us as potential Muslims. And in that long-range process of making America Muslim, all of America Muslim.
Now, this video clip is Hamas itself. It's not what I'm saying, it's what they say out of their own mouth. So for all of you who are just like Islamist lovers, don't blame me, it's what they said. Now, as they said, their founding idea was, well, their goal as the destruction of Israel. They have numerous forms of anti-Semitic extermination language. They reject any form of negotiation. They want to implement Sharia law. Their whole way of implementing Sharia law is through jihad and terrorism, and they will repress minorities and Christians. They will use human shields, and they will conduct forms of indoctrination of children. Now, in the new charter, they actually call October 7th a calculated and glorious maneuver. They say that they had planned it, which goes completely against what all the leftists say of, it's just a reaction to free Palestine. They reject any form of spontaneity of October 7th. They said, no, we did this. This is us, it's all us. And they glorified the violence itself. Now, as I said, the media have just ignored this. Some outlets frame it as being context, with many suggesting that the atrocity was nothing more than resistance. Now, that resistance call is actually what the ANC says. So why is this important? Well, because at the weekend, the Gift of the Givers flew their very own propaganda piece into the country, and they invited him to speak at a mosque. Of course, they invited him to speak at a mosque. Now, the individual, according to the news, was a Roman Catholic priest who is from Palestine. Apparently, he is a Christians for Palestine individual, a bit like chickens for KFC. In any case, he was invited to a mosque, and he suggests that Palestinians aren't extremists. He says that there's no religious war. The actual thing that's occurring here is colonialism, and that Christian Palestinians are there to undermine Israel's propaganda. This is Israel's propaganda that the only thing Hamas wants is to eliminate anybody who isn't an Islamist. But it's not true, because you heard from Hamas itself in their own charters and in their new charter that they are very happy to exterminate Christians. So having forms of useful idiots like this individual really doesn't help anybody. But what it does serve to do is to downplay Hamas's ideology and forms of religious persecution that's actually occurring, and allows them to frame it as form as an anti-Zionist movement. It's their way of having moral clarity on what they're doing. But the reality is that's not who they are. And this is leading to parties such as Israel to actually say the media isn't obsessing about this. In fact, the only thing that the media ever obsess about is Gaza. Another thing the media aren't obsessing about is what's going on right now in Iran. Why? Because the left has partnered with Islamism. Now, where you can see this on full display is in Somaliland. For those of you who watched my video, you will recall that Israel became the first country in the world to formally recognize Somaliland. and they frame the recognition as being in the spirit of the Abraham Accords. Now, they suggest that there will be forms of strategic cooperation between security, agriculture, and technology with Israel. Now, the global response to this has been condemnation. Condemnation from Somalia, the African Union, the EU, Qatar, Jordan, and Algeria. Now, remember that Qatar is against the whole thing that's occurring in Venezuela. Now, they suggest that this is all a violation of Somalia's territorial integrity, with even the United States saying that they refuse at this point in time, at the time of recording, to follow Israel's lead. Although, given what I'm about to say, I don't know how long that will last. Now, Israel itself, despite having been criticized for the recognition, actually had this to say about it. Have a watch.
Israel has the same right to conduct diplomatic relations as any other sovereign state. Earlier this year, several countries, including members of this council, made the unilateral decision to recognize a non-existent Palestinian state, and yet no emergency meeting was called to express this council's outrage. This council's persistent double standards and misdirection of focus distract from its mission of maintaining international peace and security.
And unfortunately, Israel is not wrong. You see, what's actually going on here is that they've recognized an independent state in the same guise that everybody else did with Palestine. But when everybody else does it, it's fine. When you recognize the Palestinian state, the alignment between the Islamists and the left, A-OK. But when you go out and you recognize Somaliland for geostrategic purposes, well, that's not okay. Now, very interestingly, remember, when it comes through to the Palestinian state, Palestine this week also issued a very telling statement where they said that they actually support the Republic of China's claim over Taiwan and that they would like to assert the One China policy. And so they reject any interference with China and their domestic affairs and say that China has the right to Taiwan. Now, this itself is important because the state of Palestine wants territory from the state of Israel. So it's amazing, yet again, this is an example of where we see the left aligning with Islam. It's important to understand that this is a country who says they want recognition, but they will not afford the same rights to Taiwan. Now let's check in quickly with what's going on in Iran, because according to a tweet, the Ayatollah now says that he will not give in to the enemy. And for clarity, the enemy is the people of Iran. So the Ayatollah is now directly saying that the people of Iran are actually his enemy. And this is leading many individuals to ask the fundamental question, why is the BBC not covering this? They're incessantly still covering everything that's going on in Gaza, but the unrest that's occurring in Iran is largely going unnoticed. Now, let's all start tying all of this together and seeing what's actually really going on. Well, Somaliland, very interestingly enough, came out and said that they support Donald Trump's initiatives in Venezuela. They said that they stand with a principled realignment of the constitutional order in Venezuela, spearheaded by the United States. Now, Somalia, remember Somalia? Well, Somalia actually came out and they are now currently the chair of the Security Council. Yes, a country that can't even get their own shit together. Yeah, apparently that country came out and said that they want to hold an emergency meeting on Monday at 10 o'clock time of recording, and they want to discuss everything that's occurred between the United States and Venezuela. Remember, this is the same Somalia that's now having problems with Somaliland, who says that they support Donald Trump. You see, the order is now fragmenting. Now, going back to Iran, individuals are now being gunned down. Iranian citizens are being gunned down in the streets. Now, remember that in Iran, you can't own a firearm, so there's no way for them to resist to the tyranny of the Ayatollah without being shot. In fact, you can actually have a watch right here. Now, unfortunately, casualties are mounting, with many Iranians saying that they are going to be killed as protesters to see the liberation of their country. And yet, where is the left whilst all this action occurs? They were quick to criticize everybody else and to cover those propaganda pieces, but when this now occurs, they all silent. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if I were to explain to you what has Donald Trump effectively done, what Donald Trump has done, and what we have seen in the last week is how the global order, regardless of whom they are, is nothing more than hypocritical. When it comes to Somaliland, they won't recognize it, but they'll recognize Palestine. When it comes through to democracy, they want democracy, but then want to protect a communist dictator. And I want to highlight that I myself didn't say that Trump's move into Venezuela was for good purposes. I actually showed you what Rubio himself said. But regardless, what we are seeing is that the left is supporting dictators. And what we're also seeing is that the left is supporting Islamists, and we're seeing that in the support that they are providing to various different countries. So the long and short of it is that the world is fragmenting. Lines are being drawn, divisions are occurring, and the narrative being pushed forward is not coherent. Different standards are being applied to different people. And what this is showing is that lines are being drawn and parties are siding on various sides of the spectrum. And South Africa may find itself siding with the very wrong people. In other words, we are most likely to align ourselves with the Islamist left. At least that's my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Very long video, lots to piece together. Let me know what you think in the comments. Until next time, bye.